you know, somebody needs to get a new laptop, and that person would be me. So sorry you don't get to hear my Jimi Hendrix playlist, which is rather unfortunate because Jimi Hendrix plays pretty well out here in my quote unquote studio. So, what do you do? Well, yeah, good evening. Little different kind of video here for me than what is on my normal channel, if you will. Usually it's geology and a little bit of history thrown in there, but tonight is actually more along the lines of talking about me, which is a very weird thing to say because I'm not one that usually talks about myself. And then if anybody shows up, I'd love to talk to you, hear from you, a little bit about kind of your thoughts, thinkings, and whatnot. This video is going to obviously stay up for a while, maybe not forever, but definitely for a while. And just as a point of reference for people to come back to if they ever want to find out more about me, if you will. So, the reason I have called everyone here today, and it's past 7 o'clock, so we're good to go. The reason I have started this video is because I've made it very abundantly clear by this point in time that I am running for King Conservation District Board position number 2. Politics is a weird thing. I'd never had previously considered running for it. However, this is one of those positions that it just kind of makes a little bit too much sense. It's funny I brought this up initially to my wife, and my wife, who loves, cares, and supports me, and I wouldn't be in this position or even running for this position if she hadn't given me the yes. Uh, when I told her about it initially, and I told her I wasn't going to make a decision without her, she goes, "You've already made the decision, haven't you?" So she knows me very well at this point in time, but it is what it is. So yeah, I was kind of not tripped in. I was voluntold about this position. A good friend of mine suggested me do some research into it. I've talked to some good people about it, and let's throw our hat in the ring. The big question of all is kind of what a role like with the conservation district. What qualifies somebody like me for that sort of position? Well, number one, the quite simplest thing is I live in the district. It's Conservation District number 2 stretches down from Tukwila, Burien, Des Moines, Renton, Newcastle, Tukwila, Kent, Auburn, up in Covington, Maple Valley, Black Diamond. It does not include Algona, Federal Way, and Enumclaw. I'm going to work on that though. But that's just basically South King County. Pretty much from like the bottom of Lake Washington south to Pierce County. I've been here a while. I've bounced around a little bit between Covington, between Maple Valley, Ravensdale. I live in Auburn now personally, so I've kind of been around South King County. If you've been on my website, you've read a little bit about my bio and whatnot. Some of my earliest memories in this place are just walking along the banks of the river as my dad was fishing. Most of the time it was falling in the banks, and when the times when I was attempting to actually fish, it was mostly tangling my line. But still very good memories, especially along the Green River. Not so much on the White River. I remember back when the sockeye salmons were running in Lake Washington, and you could go fish for them out there, and the combat fishing that was. Truly gonna miss those days because those sockeye salmon, gorgeous salmon. I grew up playing in the parks in the area, visiting all the state parks: Canasket Palmer, Nolte State Park, Flaming Geyser State Park, going out to Dash Point State Park, Des Moines recreational sites, Seahurst Park, Gene Coulon Park, so on. All of these parks that are local to our area that we're so fortunate to have. And on top of that, too, also getting to go out and experience the woods up in the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest. So up I-90 and up Highway 410 towards Mount Rainier. And I think that's one interesting thing about the Conservation District position is that King County doesn't just stop at, civilization, if you will. King County has an incredibly rich place of things. We've got everything from Puget Sound all the way up to part of Mount Rainier Tahoma National Park. So there's a lot of diversity that we get to grow up and experience and see every single day of our lives. And just kind of growing up and experiencing that really led me kind of down the path of being interested in the world. Uh, Geology, which is my background, has always been my first love, just since as long as I can remember. I touched on it a little bit, but my grandparents still tell a story to this day of when I was a kid. They gave me this big red volcano or geology, earthquakes, volcano book. I still have it to this day, and read that thing front, back, sideways, 7 ways to Sunday. And then they took me down to Mount St. Helens for my first time, and I ran into the Johnston Ridge Observatory like a top fuel dragster, and I was talking to monument people, the rangers there, as if they knew nothing. So the love for it has always been. I remember watching Mount St. Helens erupt in 2004 through 2008. I don't remember exact year what, but nonetheless, I was around for the Nisqually earthquake. So it being around all of this stuff kind of triggered that interest, and it wasn't actually until a few years ago, life events, if you will. We're still trying to figure out what happens when we grow up. Where I kind of figured out the path of things and where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do, and it just so happened decided that I'd take a shot on geology. So got myself an education in the geoscience fields and communication, utilizing that through several different volunteer roles, which includes the Black Diamond Museum, which is kind of my home base. We do associations with pretty much all museums in South King County to some capacity, but primarily the ones up on the Enumclaw Plateau, which include Buckley, technically, it's kind of on the line, Enumclaw, Maple Valley. We talk with several of the other ones too. I'm afforded the opportunity to work with other museums throughout the area, throughout pretty much the entire Pacific Northwest, from Bellingham to Chehalis. I've gone down to this freaking, what do you call it, all the way down to California, and I've talked to East Bay Regional Park. Oh, I can think of that. I made some really good friends down with where Black Diamond came from. Before that, I mean, I hiked all over the place. I did guided hikes for many years up in Mount Rainier. Gone all over the place. I have a lovely now role with the Mount Baker Snoqualmie fire lookouts. We man Kelly Butte as well as Suntop. Granite Peak is coming, or Granite Mountain is coming up here in the next few years once they get the roof back on it. So that's affording an opportunity at the top of watersheds, if you will. Kelly Butte is awesome too, because when you're sitting up there, you're right on top of both the Green River watershed and the White River watershed, which run right through South King County, which is pretty cool to see from the top all the way down. And then, gosh, you pair it with, I mean, you see it, the Winds of Change Alliance, which is an organization that I've been so fortunate to be a part of that works on the eco-cultural stewardship of the lands from the indigenous perspective, if you will. So the original stewards of our lands, and kind of how urban forestry works and how we can, kind of live in this kind of cross world of how, nature and the environment work, which is a very complex problem. So it's a lot of opportunities like that where, for me, what has been most important over the years is developing a lot of different kinds of relationships. When I ran, or should I say, when I submitted my paperwork for this position, I didn't realize though that I have a lot of friends in a lot of places. I was looking at kind of the map for South King County, and I realized that I have different relations in every single city that's labeled on that map, which I think is pretty cool because it shows that every single part of this county is connected. And to more of a degree about that, I think that's one thing that is kind of, on one hand, is slightly, is an interesting perspective, but on the other hand, it's not, because one kind of thing, to kind of start talking about the conservation district a little bit, which, if you don't know, King Conservation District is, they fill a lot of different roles, from wildfire, kind of hazard management, to shoreline management, to dealing with grants for farmers, to helping do plant restoration stories, to selling plants. Their plant sellings, or their plant, their yearly, what do you call it? Plant sales is a huge, huge thing. So a lot of it is kind of helping to in a way, kind of help provide perspective when it comes to what the county can do when it comes to conservation. Now, the big thing about that is we have to, and this is kind of something that stuck out to me a little bit, is that King County is, as we touched on at the start a little bit, is a very diverse place. What works for somebody in Burien, White Center, Des Moines is not going to work for somebody that's down in, say, Renton. It's not going to work the same as somebody that's in, say, Greenwater. Believe it or not, Greenwater's in King County, which has always been funny to me. So, kind of one of my biggest things when it comes to a position like this is what can we do to get folks to talk to each other? And by that I mean when somebody looks at a perspective and they say to themselves, well, I think it should be this way because of that reason. Well, I think one thing that's often lost on a lot of people is that those kind of perspectives don't necessarily work for everybody. So what somebody sees as a conservation issue in Burien, say hypothetically, say for a farmer out on the Enumclaw Plateau, somebody who has this perspective from Burien White Center is not going to have the same perspective as somebody from Enumclaw. So really opening lines of communication and establishing those kind of cross, I don't want to even call it cross county lines, but cross world lines, if you will. Cross, like, how can these people talk to these people, and how can those people talk to those people, and how can we all work together? And conservation is definitely one of those things that is a hell of a question to ask, because when it comes down to it, there's a lot. And I made this point during a presentation that I had not too long ago, which is when it comes to things like the ecocultural story, or when it comes to environmental concerns, be it shoreline restoration, it becomes pollution. I was actually just listening to the news on the way home this afternoon, and there was talk about a fairly large sewage spill, I believe out near Bainbridge Island or Bremerton, somewhere out on the Kitsap Peninsula. And I hear stuff like that and I think to myself, why in the Sam heck are we having sewage dumped into Puget Sound? And why is it even getting to that point? But those are the kind of questions that, broad questions especially, that, somebody from my perspective who is coming into this role, maybe not necessarily with an environmental background. Again, my background is in geology as well as communications, but I really enjoy building relations. I really enjoy being put into positions where I'm allowed to question and I'm allowed to go to folks of different backgrounds and perspectives and say, hey, what's going on here? And why is it this way? Not necessarily trying to sit there and tell the folks that know more than I do, what their job should be, but just trying to understand things. And for me, one of the greatest joys in my life is being able to take these very, 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 very big, large concepts and boil them down into topic sizes that anybody can understand. One of my biggest research projects that I've ever done was determining where the rock of the Green River Gorge came from. That was my keystone flag in the ground research, if you will. And through that process, I got to talk and deal with a lot of people from Yakima to Wenatchee to Colville Nation to Bellingham. It was a wide, wide area. And the beautiful thing about that is, as I went around to all these people, I then generated these connections with these other people. And it kind of created this nice little web net. And that has also fed into another perspective, talking more about the cumulative impacts of kind of how things are, if you will. One thing that I've noticed, if you will, is going back to that communication part, again, in my background, is the ability to talk, is the ability to look at that kind of wider cumulative impact. It's not just, you don't look at just one fixed issue. So hypothetically speaking, say, I don't know, there's an oil tank, I guess you could, just hypothetically, there's an oil tank sitting on the side of a road. Cool. So when we talk about cumulative impact, sure, that oil tank's sitting on the side of the road, hypothetically speaking, let's say it's leaking, so it's dripping oil out of it. So the immediate impact is we see that there's an oil tank leaking. But what is that oil getting into? Well, it's getting into the grass. Animals can be affected by it. It can, if it leaks enough, it can get down into a water source and it's nearby there. One big issue that faces King County is the critical aquifer recharge areas. They're not very well mapped. I kind of like to know where my water's coming from and potentially even what's in my water. So it's kind of another one of those things to touch on and think about and kind of try to generate those relationships to get to that point where I can talk to these different kinds of people and bring them to the table to give them perspective. So then through the conservation district, utilizing my background in communications, use that role of district or position number 2 to kind of stand at the forefront and say, okay, everybody, here are these conservation issues. Here is the conservation district. And here, bringing together all of these people from the perspective of kind of having the abilities that are afforded to a conservation district, then we can actually bring these open conversations and have them, because I am a firm believer that one should not be sitting in a perspective of, oh, look at me, I'm on a board and I have this position of power. I'm of the perspective of, I don't know everything. I'm going to straight up come out and admit it. I do not have a conservation specific background degree. My degree, again, is in geology and communications. I've taken conservation classes. It's not my specialty. I will fully admit that. But the thing that I find very important is finding those specific relations that want to work together, utilizing the role as the board, or on the board, if you will, to bring those relations into a bigger light, if you will, as well as also being to kind of then direct them on who, the where, the what, the why, and the how, so that when somebody comes to the conservation district and they say, hey, I've got a stream in my backyard that I want to do restoration on, say we've got a bunch of invasive plants that are growing through it, then I can go, hey, I've learned through this role that here are some of the pathways that you can go to. Because in the perspective of being in a conservation district position like that, that's the kind of place that people are going to. They're going to them and saying, hey, we've got this conservation issue, we want to go, it's a resource. So being in a perspective like that, where I'm able to utilize my background in communications, as well as at least having a base level understanding of kind of the natural sciences of things, geology, I guess you could constitute it, really affords me the opportunity to not just learn for myself, but then to take what I've learned and what I will learn and continue to learn and always will, because learning is awesome, and shed light on certain things and really kind of answer the questions that people need to know in regards to whatever kind of situation. So a perfect example of that, what is the King Conservation District? I talked to a very good friend about that not too long ago, and he said that that was kind of one thing that he had experienced with the Conservation District, but he really mentioned that using kind of that wetlands and kind of habitat restoration thing, the Conservation District was able to help them with grants. They were help them with clearing the property, getting rid of those invasive animal or species of plants. I mean, that's the kind of thing that a district like that should not just be from the perspective of somebody that's just doing random research and it just pops up. That should be on the forefront of everybody's mind. Being in that position and also being able to, I guess you could say, specialize in relationship building, I think really excites me, because it's more than just for me at that point in time. I'm going to be building relationships no matter how I do it, whether I'm in this position or whether I'm just Joe Blow out in the middle of the woods somewhere doing what I do. But the beautiful thing is that kind of relationship building from that perspective, from that position, I get to bring the joy that I get to experience through that communication and through that relationship building and bring it to you. And in the event that I am voted into that position, then I can take that kind of stuff that I get to learn, and not just through like being in that position, but hell, I'm learning stuff about this position myself every single day. And that's also a shameless plug, because this is not the last kind of a talk that I'm going to have about this. Really, all this one is here is introducing you and I together, and then kind of starting to I don't know, maybe just figure each other out, and also kind of just to get a base level understanding of where I'm at, where you're at, so on and so forth. With the holidays coming up, I'm not going to be as active when it comes to that kind of stuff, obviously. I mean, I might do one more talk like this before the end of the year, maybe. But in January, we're going to actually start going to places, and like I actually want to physically meet people, not just sitting here on YouTube. Like, this is cool and all, don't get me wrong. I'm very used to being in front of a camera. I'm very used to talking to myself like I do. But there's no better way of doing things than actually going out and meeting people in person and getting to have these kind of conversations about perhaps what is important to you when it comes to conservation. Is it, managing our streams? Is it managing wildlife populations? Is it wildfire concerns? I mean, I was thinking about this the other day as I was doing some trail cleaning. Is there that I was in? I mean, the blackberry bushes out there are, I'm 5'9" on a good day. These blackberry bushes were easily 8 feet tall, and it's winter time. So I kept thinking to myself the whole time, like, man, this is one lightning strike away from, whoof, we're all screwed. So that's another platform point right there. It's just the broad destroying of the Himalayan blackberries, the invasive plants that they are, but that's a story for another day, if you will. So yeah, I mean, this was really just, like I said, as I said, it's kind of a meet and greet, if you will, and just establishing who I am, some very general thoughts that I have when it comes to this kind of a role. I don't want to call them some of the points that I want to make, because for me, kind of the three main sticking points of what I'm running on, if you will, are watershed health. Some of my volunteer roles, one of the biggest, most important things to me is maintaining healthy water. We all need it. It's drinking water is kind of the important part for our lives. But there have been several instances where water health gets a little bit affected. I mean, looking, for example, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, with the sewage being dumped into Puget Sound. Yeah. So that's kind of a big thing for me. And watershed is not just, again, kind of talking about those cumulative impacts. It's not just the quality of the water, but it's what is affecting the quality of the water. So that's how our forests are treated. I will admit I'm a little bit of a preservationist when it comes to management of that kind of stuff. It's the old Gifford Pinchot, John Muir kind of debate about who's right when it comes to forest management. I'm kind of in favor of a preservationist perspective. I will admit that. But in an elected role, it's not my job to put my own personal biases out there and to say, well, I'm a preservationist and that's how I'm going to. No. My job as an elected official or a potential elected official is to listen to the people who voted me into office and even the people who didn't, get those perspectives, and then make my decisions based upon that perspective. And that for me is one huge point that I want to emphasize through this whole process, is that yes, I have my way of thinking and kind of what I think about, kind of how I look at perspectives, but that is not set in stone. Never. It has not been. My perspective is, yeah, I've got this, and I will discuss my foundational level of knowledge with that. But what comes first is what the vast majority of people who elect me is. That, more than anything else, I am elected to represent those people's voices, not my own. That's just me. However, that kind of bounces into the next point, if you will, is protecting green spaces. I mentioned earlier at the start, too, that parks are huge thing for me. I love being outdoors. I don't know anybody in this area that doesn't. Again, it kind of comes with the territory, if you will. I touched a little bit about CARES, the critical recharge areas. It's a mouthful to say. Going back kind of to the water story a little bit, is so when we talk about cumulative impacts, we have these critical aquifer recharge area. These are areas where our aquifers, where a lot of cities, city of Auburn, where I live, gets their water from. So these are water inputs. So rain is pooling in these areas. Creeks are coming down in these areas. The ground is sufficient enough to suck down that water to recharge these aquifers. But that water is also sucking down whatever is on the surface too. So using our oil tanker kind of example that we used earlier, that oil is getting down into our water supply. That's a problem because I don't like slimy water, matter of personal opinion. So, CARAs are kind of one thing that I discussed with another gentleman recently that is something I'd like to also pay attention to too. Why hasn't the county done certain kind of research into that? Why don't we know more about our critical areas? Not just CARAs, but critical areas throughout the entire county. And what can somebody, from the perspective of being in a conservation district, do to build those kind of relations with the people that can do that kind of research, whether it's in the county, whether it's in a private industry, or whether it's with the state, federal government, so on and so forth? Who can do that kind of research to make sure that we don't have freaking oil or sewage or whatever else in our water? That's just me. But based on those relationships too that we build, that leads into, and I touched on this a little bit too already, is the education part. Education, I'm a firm believer that education and outreach is how you expand the mission. If nobody knows who you are, you're talking to yourself in the woods like you do. I know that myself more probably than anybody else. I will fully admit, I am still learning about this position. And I probably will be through this entire facade, if you will. But the thing about that is when I learn, you're going to learn too. And it's like I touched on, this isn't the last one of these talks that we're going to have. We're going to have several more than likely. Some of them might just be kind of pop-up sorts of things. But when I get to learn new information and I can accurately bring it to you with able to cite my sources, again, having a geology background, citing my sources and being able to back it up with positive fact is huge. I base a lot of my own personal social media stuff on that. Huge. So as I learn through this process, you're going to learn through this process. And who knows, you may end up wanting to be a part of the conservation district, or you may want to flip into a role like that someday. And even if I don't win, it's just perfectly fine. It's more than, you never know. I ultimately, my penultimate goal is always to inspire curiosity. Steve Irwin, I think, said it best when he said that it's my goal, my mission, the reason I'm on this planet. Now, mind you, his comment was talking about animals, but it is my modus operandum, if you will, to take interesting science conversations and topics and high-level thinking and bring them down so that anybody can understand them. I was recently told that through one of my own videos that somebody who she told me, it was so funny. She told me, I'm tearing up a little bit actually just thinking about it. She told me that throughout school she hated science, but she watched one of my videos and she said that it was the greatest science experience of her life. I know that I'm doing my job right when that happens. It's the same thing in the conservation district. I know that I'm doing my job right when, one, people are coming to me and saying, I know what the King Conservation District is. Boom, perfect. Two, when they're coming to me and saying, the King Conservation District is helping me. And three, I'm still learning new stuff every day and building those new relations. So through this entire process, at the end of it, it's like February 23rd, I think, is when the final vote or something like that comes out, end of February. No matter what happens at the very end of this, the joy that I'm going to experience learning through this process, and not just how to run a campaign. Never done that before. Mildly terrifying. Whatever, we're just going to send it. Fine. But at the end of the day, I hope, for not just my sake, but for your sake too, that we both get to learn new things through this process. And like I said, I'm going to bring new information to you all the time, and I hope you give me new information. I do have the comments on this kind of, I can't see them because the phone is actually backwards because the little stand I got is kind of silly. So if you are leaving comments right now, I apologize. I can't see them because I tried to get my laptop working. My laptop is old and it has 2 gigabytes of RAM. So I need a new one basically. But ultimately speaking, please leave a comment. And I want you to kind of answer that question for me is, what do you view as either what is the most important conservation issue you believe that the county, and even for a larger aspect, Western Washington, the Pacific Northwest, what is the most important conservation issue to you? And it doesn't matter if it's, again, talking about CARES, it doesn't matter if it's talking about watersheds, it doesn't matter if it's talking about shoreline rehabilitation. I just want to know, from your perspective, What is the most important issue to you? And if you feel so inclined, go into as much detail as you want. I want that detail because what that does for me is that says, hey, these people are thinking about this. That's what I need to go research to find out more information on. So we're kind of helping each other in a way. You are going to help inform me so that I can inform others and we can all work together ultimately for the same hopeful goal in the grand scheme of things. So I've been going now for 30 minutes. Yeah, 30 minutes. I don't want to keep you all night. It's kind of boring hearing somebody talk about themselves for 30 minutes and kind of their thoughts and ideas and whatnot. So I promise that the next one of these I do is going to be a little bit more interesting. This, like I said, this was kind of just a hello, my name's Zach, pleasure to meet you. So at the end of the day, if you did swing by for a little bit, I appreciate it. If you didn't, that's all right too. If you're seeing this in the future, please, by all means, let me know as well what your thoughts, feelings, whatever it might be when it comes to conservation and kind of what you think. It doesn't, and I'm always open for if you want to have open conversations about your thoughts, feelings, whatever else. The door is always open. My email is always open. Maybe not the phone because I don't want I work in a government building, so I don't want my phone ringing off the hook. But please, if you have any questions or comments or thoughts on life, don't hesitate to reach out to me on any of my social medias or any of my emails. It doesn't matter. Please, I might not get back to you immediately, but I guarantee it'll be within at least 24 hours. It might come at 11 o'clock at night because I work pretty late, but I promise I will get back to you and we'll have a great conversation. So with that, like I said, it's been about 30 minutes. It's cold out in my garage. This is my studio of sorts. So I'm going to call it quits for the evening. I'm sure we're going to see each other again. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you on the next one.